Hello, everyone. Welcome to HS Dracones, to our webinar series. This is called Empathy Training for Technical Professionals. And really, our goal and our mission as a company is to bridge the gap between technology and business and to help translate between those two worlds. And this is one of the foundational skills that is a part of that. And so we've decided to separate it out into a quick webinar breaking down exactly what empathy means and how you can go about doing it in your business life. So the first question whenever we talk about something like this is to ask, well, what do we mean by empathy? A lot of people think about empathy as something that's kind of soft and squishy. We're talking about feelings, we're talking about emotions. It's one of those soft skills. And that is a real misrepresentation both of what it is, but also how powerful it can be. When we think about empathy, we're really thinking about how to apply a system to people, just like the way we apply it to networks and machines. So this means, what can we learn about people and what can we learn about the person we're talking to that we can then use to inform our choices. The same way that you study any of sort of system or network or environment around you and then make decisions based on that, based on the patterns you've seen in the past. It is really not a soft skill, because at the heart of what all of our business entails are people. And when we think about people, we think really about our relationships. And when it comes down to it, what we mean by a relationship is we mean that people like to work, or people work with the people who they trust, who they like, and who they respect. That's what a business relationship entails. And when we say trust, I mean that they feel like they can understand what you're saying and validate it for themselves, interpret it, go and check it, and that they see that, you know what, this holds water, this is true. Eventually, they stop needing to do that validating when they start to trust you, because it becomes intrinsic. And that's when you become someone's trusted advisor and you have a deep connection with them. On the other end of the spectrum, right, towards the right, we have this notion of respect. And respect means more than just seeing someone's reputation and their value. It also means that they feel like they are being respected, that their value, their existence as a human, and their validity and credibility is all being represented and understood and appreciated, and that is entering into the relationships, into the conversations that they're having. When people work with someone who they don't respect, they often end up finding themselves getting shortchanged and walking away from that. We've all been there. Finally, this idea of working with someone you like, that can really trip people up, because they want to believe, oh, it's just business. Shouldn't the work I do speak for itself? I shouldn't have to try and get people to like me. Business is not a popularity contest. And when we talk about liking someone, we're not talking about it in that sense. We're not talking about, the homecoming queen or king of business. What we mean by this is it's usually a combination of trust and respect, as well as the ability to work with someone easily. Ease of doing business is a major impact and a major choice in why someone chooses to work with someone else. And if you can make it easy for someone to work with you, then they will continue to come back because they enjoy it, because it doesn't cost them as much as it might cost to work with someone else. So having the ability to trust the work you do, to respect the work you do and how you go about it, and to be able to do it and engage in it in a way that is not difficult, challenging, or frustrating, is how you build a relationship with other people. So beyond this notion of being able to build relationships, why are we spending so much time talking about empathy? How does it really impact your bottom line? Well, first, it's going to help you really differentiate from the competition. As we just said before, there's all these reasons people work with someone. And if you stand out from the crowd because you're easier to work with, or because you engage people on a different way and in a different level, you talk to them differently, your message sounds more authentic, more sincere, more trustworthy, then you will stand out from the crowd. Furthermore, empathy is all about understanding what someone else is going through, what their needs are, and being able to speak to them. And that also means that you have the ability to speak to them in that way the first time. So a lot of what we'll notice when we're working with clients is that these conversations that they're having with potential business partners or potential customers often take a really long time. And a sales cycle can be the death of an organization. A long sales cycle may be what keeps you from being able to be profitable and stay solvent. If you are able to get it right the first time, you're going to be much more efficient, much more effective, and your conversations are going to move from the introductory stage to the engagement stage a lot more quickly. Finally, empathy is what allows you to create new roads to new ideas, new understanding, new engagements, new opportunities. When you start talking to people with curiosity, about where they come from, how they make their choices, what their needs are, you not only create more understanding, but you create new inroads for new work and new ways to engage with others. All of these things start with being empathetic and with being curious about the person that you're talking to. So in practice, what does empathetic communication look like? So here we have these two people having, or hopefully having, an empathetic conversation. This person on the left has an idea, has something that he wants to convey. The first thing he needs to do is create a context, a space where that conversation can happen. Then he needs to put words around what he's trying to say, put it into speech. And then finally, he needs to do so in a way and choose his words in a way that will connect with that other person. If he can do those three things, then he will succeed in not only transmitting his idea, but also having an empathetic and an effective conversation that helps and strengthens his relationship. Okay, so what does this mean in a practical sense? How do I start? You start by learning about the other person, identifying what motivates them, and then aligning your work with those motivating factors. There are all sorts of different things that this can entail, right? One of the first things you're going to want to find out is, what are this person's priorities? What's the top of their list? If you are not engaging them where their pain is, where their needs are, where their goals are, then you're not going to be successful. You need to figure out what's top of mind. Furthermore, what are their beliefs? What do they already believe about the world? This is important because it can stymie a conversation if there are presumptions about essential beliefs that are untrue or inaccurate or incongruous. We already kind of touched on this. You also need to think about people's needs. What is their gap that they might have that needs to get filled? Does your work align with that? Does it fill that void? We can't empathize with a company. You have to empathize with a person, right? And people have power, or they may have power. You need to be able to know when you're talking to someone, do they have the power to make this decision, to get this work done, to move the ball down the field, so to speak? What are their capacities for engaging with me? And where do they sit amongst this organization? Furthermore, then what are their goals? Their goals and their priorities and their needs, as we've been talking about, may be different from their organizations. Of course, they want their organization to succeed, but their goal maybe is something as simple as looking good in front of their boss or getting a promotion. Well, how can you align your work to align with those goals? Similarly, what are their desires? What are the things that matter to them, that get them excited? This might be something that's different from revenue or profit. There might be other sorts of things that they want. Perhaps they're the type of person who wants recognition, Well, how do you find a way to engage with them on that? Values. Now, we talk about business values a lot, but it's becoming more and more important in today's market. For instance, philanthropic buying is the consumer markets for philanthropic companies is really growing, especially younger generations, for instance, are spending a lot more money on things that they align with their value. Brands like Tom's Shoes or Patagonia, they align their products behind a value and a mission that is based in some other sort of goal. And people buy their products because they hold those same values. Do you know the values that your customers have, or your partners or your stakeholders? And then finally, at the end of the day, as much as you might want to, you can't push something that is limited by some other sort of factors. So you need to know what are this person's powers, but also their limitations. Where does the buck stop? And if they only can get you so far, how can you move through those limitations? Now, all of these things are not necessary to have a successful conversation, but it is good to kind of take inventory of what you do know about the person before you start talking to them. And if you don't know all of these things, well, where can you start? Which of them can you use to make a connection and to have a conversation? I'm not saying that you should sit down and interview someone. Well, tell me about your thoughts and your needs and your beliefs and your goals and how much power or limitations you have. But you can certainly sit and talk to someone and say, you know, how can I help you be successful? What are your pain points right now? And frankly, what does it take to get something done in your organization? How does this work? Where do I need to go? What are your powers to help me do that? These are the ways that you start a conversation that is not just about talking, but also about engaging empathetically. So again, I just ended that last slide by saying this is not just about talking. It's not just about figuring out your message and then saying it over and over and over again, because your audience is going to change, but also the way that that information resonates will change based on who that person is. So for instance, we have this axis of information versus impact. Information is useful, but information for information's sake doesn't do anything. You need to make sure that you have the so what of your information within your conversation. What impact is this going to make on the world, on this other person, on the organization, on someone's bottom line? If that is not clear, then that information won't be of any value to the person you're speaking with. Similarly, facts are useful, but when someone hears a fact, they don't own it. They only own what they have knowledge about. And you want the person you're talking to own your message, because when you have ownership over something, then you have the ability to share it, to repeat it, and you often want to. When someone learns something new, that is that light bulb moment is exciting. It usually inspires them to want to retell whatever they learned, to share it with someone else. Hey, I learned something new today. Hey, did you know this? I just found this out. If you leave it at the fact level, then they won't have the ability to engage with the information, and therefore they won't be able to talk about it. This happens a lot, especially if you're working with, for instance, a gatekeeper in a larger organization, someone that you need to talk to in order to get to the meeting that you're with the person you're really trying to reach. If that person gets all the facts, but doesn't have any knowledge when they leave the conversation with you, when their boss turns around and says, so how was that meeting? Is this worthwhile? Should we think about having a second conversation? They won't be able to accurately and articulately describe why they should their boss should have that conversation. But if you present this information in a way that allows them to own it and empowers them to tell that story, then they will be able to become really an ambassador for you, to share your story, to do the work for you of getting your message out. And it's in this way that you can start multiplying the value of your conversations so that you don't have to be the one continually telling your story, that other people will be able to pick up that mantle and continue it. So I mentioned the word story a few times in that last section, and that's not without purpose, because storytelling is the number one way to get information across in a way that it becomes knowledge. And part of that is actually grounded in human psychology and in our brains and the way that they function. When we hear a story, we process it in much the same way that we process an experience that we've had. And when we reflect back on a story, it's hard for us to differentiate between something we heard about and something we experienced for ourselves. And it's that allows us to tap into that experience and share it in a meaningful and convincing way. So when you're telling your story, you want to break it down into essentially these 5 parts that will give people the information they need, as well as kind of the narrative form they need to be able to convey it. The first thing that you're going to need to think about is, well, what is the beginning of my story, and where is it, and where does it lie in this conversation? Everyone knows that you're going to encounter people with a wide range of background knowledge, context, and insight into the work that you do. And if you are talking to someone and you're not meeting them where they are, then the rest of your story will not resonate. So where is the beginning for this person? Do they need some background information, or are they ready to jump right in? How much context do they have? Identifying where to start is the first step. From there, it's absolutely essential that everyone agrees on whatever the problem is. All good stories start with some sort of conflict. The hero needs to cross the mountain, needs to slay the dragon to rescue the princess, whatever that conflict is. If we don't all understand and agree upon what that problem is, then the rest of this conversation can never take place. And oftentimes, especially when you're talking to people who aren't as familiar with your field, the difficulty is not that they can't understand the material, but it's that they didn't even know that this was a problem. They thought that the technology we were using so far, the status quo, what we've been working with was as good as it gets, was fine. I don't see the need for anything new. For those people, it's all about identifying upon and agreeing upon the problem. Furthermore, even if this person already knows everything about your situation, you still want to articulate the problem and get their buy-in, because that tees you up to be able to say, well, hey, I have a solution and this is it. Providing a solution before you've agreed upon a problem really is cutting yourself off at the knees when it's in terms of impact. So after you have the problem is when you have the opportunity to say, well, great, now we've agreed we're in dire need. Here is my solution, and it looks like this. After that, and only after that, is when, if it's necessary, this really should be in brackets, you are able to share about the science. Talking about the solution is not talking about the science. It's not talking about the how. It's talking about the what. It's talking about the impact. It's talking about the mechanism for change. The science is how you came to that conclusion and what it looks like, the intricacies of it, the challenges that are still there, and the differences between what is going on right now and what your solution looks like. Finally, after all of that, you end with the impact. You go back to, so how does this change the world? What does this do for people, for the planet, for this company, for this device, whatever scope you're talking about? You need to be able to articulate it, and not only articulate it, but measure it. This is where you put in some numbers. X amount of time saved. Y number of pounds of fossil fuels saved. Z number of lives saved. Whatever your scope might be, this is where you need to articulate exactly what all of this amounts to. Now, I know that this was a very quick overview, and that there's a lot of this that sounds great, but you're saying, hey, Kate, when we get down to the technical piece of it, this sounds hard, and I don't know exactly where to start. Well, tactically, this slide shows you 4 different things that you can do to start practicing empathetic communication. And these are grounded in linguistic theory. So the first one is make sure that whatever you're saying is quality, meaning it is truthful. Now, there should be a caveat next to this that says that means being truthful and making sure everyone agrees that it is truthful. Similarly to agreeing that there is a problem. If people fundamentally don't agree on the truth, then the rest of it doesn't much matter. Beyond that, we have this notion of quantity. Many times technical professionals struggle with giving too much information because they dive into the details and they overwhelm us with the various intricacies of the work that they do. But oftentimes, thinking back to our story slide, they might be giving too little. They might not be starting early enough to give enough context. So is the right information there? And that actually leads into the relevance piece, because being pertinent to the discussion and appropriate for the timing means, well, first of all, is this person ready for this conversation? Is this the right person for this conversation? Do they have what they need? But also, do they know what they need to know for this to be useful? And is this the right time in the sequence of our engagement, of our relationship, to be having this conversation? We can't jump in too soon. Last, there is the whole situation of, well, how do I actually put all this information together? Is it a PowerPoint? Is it in a presentation? Is it in an email? Is it in a phone call? Is it in a demonstration? What is the right way for me to convey this message? If you're struggling and you feel like all of the top 3 are all in line, well, then is there a different way to put it together? Now, figuring out exactly what these 4 different rules mean can still be a little bit daunting. So we have created at HSD a guide to knowing whether or not you're giving quality, quantity, relevant, and appropriate manner for each of your messages. We have this downloadable guide, a guide to cooperative conversation, that you can download, look at, and use as kind of a decision tree to help you figure out if you're on the right track. It comes with an addendum that provides examples and further explanation of each of the areas. And we think it's a useful start to understanding how to take this notion of empathy and actually translate it into the words that you speak. With that, please email me if you would like this guide. We also have a link on the page where you found this webinar where you can download this. My name is Kate Lucy, the Vice President for Communication and Language Science here at HS DeCrones, and we look forward to hearing from you, and I would love your feedback on our presentation today. Thank you.